And to the analysis of Shields and Gerson, syndicated columnist Mark Shields and Washington Post columnist Michael Gerson, who's filling in for David Brooks. Gentlemen, good to have you with us.
Great to be here.
So the health care ruling, Mark, what's your take on it?
My take on it, Judy, is I had been unaware of how dispirited, even demoralized Democrats had become until that health care decision came down. There was a new spring in Democrats' steps and a new lift to their spirits. Yes, there really was. They needed a victory. They needed a win, and they hadn't had one for quite a while, whether it's economic news or anything else. And I mean, everywhere I turned, every Democrat I ran into was exhilarated, it seemed, and just uplifted by what happened.
Unmitigated win for the Democrats. Is that how you see it?
Well, I think a Supreme Court victory for a president is better than a stick in the eye, and that's the alternative here. If it had been overturned, it would have been disastrous for him. This would have been his primary legislative achievement, overturned. Avoiding a major loss, though, is not necessarily a major victory. And I think that right now, this is still a very unpopular bill. Its numbers have been stable, remarkably stable, for really 2 years. I don't think that this is going to change that. This is an inherently conflicted issue where it's hard for either side to gain much advantage, much immediate advantage. Now you have a president that's going to defend a tax that he said was not a tax. And you have an opponent, Romney, who is going to attack a mandate, which is similar to the one he had in Massachusetts. That's an inherently prickly situation.
So you're saying it's difficult for both of them?
I think it is, but I would give, right now, you'd have to say that health care, which inspired a lot of the Democratic loss in 2010, remains a fairly unpopular issue in America. The president's message here is, let's get beyond these old debates, not let's embrace my health care reform.
Well, I think there is a case to be made, Judy, when we talk so much about the Constitution and constitutionality. We do have three branches. We've got the executive and the legislative and the judiciary. And this law was passed by the Congress, it was signed by the president, and affirmed by the Supreme Court. And I think that's regular order. I think that, yes, I don't argue with Michael that that it has been unpopular. It consistently about 40% in favor and 50% against. But I think the administration, quite frankly, walked away from it. I think it became an orphan piece of legislation. The argument wasn't made. I thought Thursday, when the decision came down, the president made the case better in the 4 or 5 minutes or 6 minutes they spoke about it than he had or anybody in the administration had since it passed.
You mean in his comments yesterday?
Now, I think he's got a window here to make a case. Let's be very blunt about it. Mitt Romney was thrilled that health care became the centerpiece, not simply because he's vulnerable, I don't mean that, but because it got off immigration, where for 2 weeks he had vacillated, hesitated, equivocated, and still has not come up with an answer on what he'd do.
So you're saying it's good for Romney?
I think getting to health care, getting immigration changing the subject was good for Romney.
I do think it's possible some voters may take a second look at this law in the aftermath and look at the individual provisions and find them helpful. Some voters may get really angry the Supreme Court didn't act and give money to Mitt Romney, which seems to have happened in the last few days. I think those effects are likely to be temporary and fairly marginal and probably buried by the jobs news we're going to get on January 6th. I'm sorry, on July 6th.
So you don't see this staying as a big issue through to November?
This was a status quo decision. It was not a major overturn, and I don't think it'll change the status quo of the election all that much.
Just to be consistent, I have felt that the losing side would be energized by the decision. And I think the energy will be with those who are against it, with the Tea Party or the more conservative Republicans. I think there's an inelastic base there. I don't think it's going to grow much. Those who are intensely against it, they will work. They'll knock on doors. They'll make telephone calls.
The
conservatives.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's a growing constituency. I think the more you discuss health care in this campaign, the better it is for the Democrats, quite honestly. I mean, whether it becomes a debate about Medicare. And Mitt Romney said on Thursday, he said, what we have to do is the law, whatever the law is, has to cover those with pre-existing conditions, and that they will be guaranteed that they'll have coverage. Well, how's that going to happen? What's the formula? I mean, all of a sudden you have to start answering questions about, how you would reach that lofty and I think admirable objective.
Do you agree the more health care is a conversation, the more it helps the Democrats?
Well, I don't know. You look at what the president said, and let's not relitigate the past. Okay, so it's a message that essentially let's live with the law. That's very different from claiming great credit for a signature achievement. And there's a lot of down ticket members of the Democratic Party that don't want to talk about health care at all, particularly if you're in a state that's a tight,
In fact, it's a different situation, isn't it? For if you're running for this House or the Senate.
It is, but I mean, if it becomes a debate about, I'm not talking about just the health care law, but it becomes a debate about Medicare. I think it works for the Democrats and against the Republicans. And I think that virtually every Democrat, from the bluest of blue dogs to the most liberal of liberals, is happy to run on Medicare and defending, strengthening, reinforcing, supporting Medicare against those who would have already voted, in fact, to change Medicare.
Does it put any more pressure, Michael, on Governor Romney to flesh out his own health care proposal, which, Mark was just
No, I think, as you probably saw from the interchange here, that Romney wants to keep this at a very, very vague level of generality here. That's probably his interest as a challenger. That's not unusual. That's usually the case. Your job is to make the critique and then talk about broad principles, and that's generally what he's done.
Anything, Mark, else to say about the court at this point? I mean, the fact that Roberts, the Chief Justice, surprised everybody and went over to the liberal.
I mean, I think it's fair to say that yesterday the Supreme Court, instead of being the Justice Anthony Kennedy Court, became the Chief Justice John Roberts Court.
That he put his
stamp on it.
No, I completely agree with that. The decision itself was a wonder. It balanced so many interests. It was like juggling on a tightrope, and he did it very successfully. Really marked the emergence of Roberts as the key figure on the court. He both avoided a major political crisis, gave conservatives things they wanted by restricting the Commerce Clause as it applies in these cases, and established himself as the central thinker on the court. That's quite an achievement.
And the court doesn't go down as a court that is predictably one that moves divided along partisan lines.
Separation of powers is alive and well here. The judges were not political machines that were just oriented towards outcomes. They were thinking independently according to the law. That's pretty reassuring, actually.
Well, one other thing that happened yesterday that somewhat got overlooked, and that is for the first time in history, Mark, the Congress, the House of Representatives, voted to say that a member of the president's cabinet to hold him in contempt, and that is, of course, the Attorney General, Eric Holder, over this so-called gun walking operation, Fast and Furious. What's the significance of that?
Well, it's significant. I mean, it's historic. It's the first time it's ever happened that a cabinet officer has been held in contempt by Congress, and it was I think one can say, not a well thought out act. It was rushed, quite frankly. In the past, when there's ever been a vote, it's been months, usually 3 months from the time there's been a committee hearing, committee finding to the Congress acting. But I think this, Judy, is we've got a convergence of factors. You've got, first of all, Darrell Issa, who was the chairman of the committee, Congressman from California, who announced, early on that he was going to be, the number one nemesis of the administration with hearings and exposure and all the rest of it. He hadn't fulfilled that promise, that pledge, but he got an opening here. This was a bad policy. It was a dumb policy. It resulted in personal tragedy.
I mean, on the part of the
administration, the part of the alcohol, tobacco, firearms, and terrorism. But at the same time, there was dissembling on the part of the Justice Department. I mean, he got his opening. Issa got his opening when they gave the wrong information, misinformation, to the committee about the program itself, and then it was full 10 months before before it was corrected. So that was the opening he had, and that's where we are right now.
So how big an embarrassment is this for the administration, for the Attorney General, Mike?
Well, I think it could have been far less if they had avoided that. I mean, they left the Congress under a false impression for 9 or 10 months, related to a real tragedy, a serious case where there are still 2,000 guns that are out there loose, where a life was lost. I think also, though, that Republicans that I talk to on the Hill are just upset about the lack of accountability in this case. When something like this goes wrong, no one is really held responsible. You had Senator Cornyn, I think, on yesterday, but when I talked to him, he asked the rhetorical question, what does it take to get fired in Eric Holder's Justice Department? This was a very serious case. So I think that has caused a number of members on the Hill that are not normally firebrands, not bomb throwers, to be deeply concerned about this case because the Justice Department left a wrong impression, has used executive privilege in a way not to protect the highest levels of communication between the president and his staff, but to cover the embarrassment of mid-level Justice Department political appointees. That's actually a pretty novel use of executive privilege, and I think that is resented on the Hill.
Does it go anywhere from here, though?
I think there's just one other point I'd quickly add, and that is I don't think there's any question that there is a personal animosity toward Eric Holder on the part of many Republicans.
Why is that?
Well, I think in part it's political. I mean, make no mistake about it that there has been a systematic effort to limit through voter ID laws the turnout. I mean, when the Republican House Majority Leader in Pennsylvania announces Governor Romney will carry Pennsylvania because of the state voter ID law we just passed here in Pennsylvania, which will knock basically Democrats from voting, even though there's no voter fraud alleged or proved, and Eric Holder has been the adversary and the nemesis on that. That does not in any way change the facts of what has happened on the gun fiasco.
But you're saying it fits into
I think it fits into a larger Republican objective.
Do you see that kind of a
well? The larger narrative here
vendetta?
is that very few people on the Hill would accuse this current Justice Department of being particularly competent. They went after CIA agents unnecessarily. They tried to try Khalid Sheikh Mohammed in New York, which was a total disaster, and now Fast and Furious. This is serial incompetence. So that's also part of the context here. And I think that there's just less tolerance for this on the Hill because of a long cumulative record here.
It showed a rather remarkable level of tolerance for the predecessor in the last administration.
And nobody's here to speak up for the Justice Department.
Well, I'll speak up for the Justice Department and the career people there and what they've done. But I don't think you can argue that Fast and Furious was a success. The only defense seems to be it was originated under the Bush administration, and that is not enough. I'm sorry, that just isn't validation of vindication.
Viewpoint heard. Viewpoint heard. Mark Shields, Michael Gerson, thank you both.
Thank you.